there he is. 2D class, very exciting. So, yeah, so thank you all for being here. And today we have the pleasure of having Ryan Parra here. Ryan Parra is a photography-based artist and educator living in Phoenix, Arizona. Originally from California, he holds a Bachelor of Fine Art degree from the University of Oregon and earned a Master of Fine Art degree from Arizona State University. His work has been shown nationally and internationally at numerous galleries. He has received many honors, including the Nathan Cummings Travel Grant Award to research flora growing in Alaska in 2015. In the summer of 2017, he did a residency in Joshua Tree National Park, documenting useful plants through Joshua Tree Highlands Artist Residency Program. And in the summer of 2019, he spent a month in Costa Rica as part of the Mesa Community College Study Abroad program, teaching photography while also documenting plants as part of his own research. Currently living in Arizona and teaching at Arizona State University and also Mesa Community College. So yeah, please welcome Ryan Parra.
Thank you, Lyle. Thank you so much, James Madison. It's been a fantastic visit so far. Thank you all. Especially Corinne, who can't be here, but thank you, Corinne, for all of her hard work for putting this whole trip together. It's been very impressive. All right. Well, I'd like to start with... Oops. My notes. Huh. There we go. Sorry, my notes weren't coming up. We tested it out, and it was working. There we go. Okay. I'd like to start with one of the most recent photographs I've created of these ferns here in Costa Rica this past summer. Sorry, let me get rid of this jacket. Of these ferns here, I photographed while in Costa Rica this past summer. As you can see, it's in this jungle of ferns with these two scientists observing and then kind of also worshiping this fern, and then with these added in little black berries and mushrooms here. It's a little hard to see at first, but these are just little black berries composited in, and then obviously the mushrooms behind myself. In order to reference these 19th century Fairy Kingdom paintings. While creating this in Photoshop, especially this structure here in the center of these scientists with all the plants and its little parts. I was just thinking about, of this viewing device that these two scientists or these two explorers create. They set it up in this field in order to learn about these ferns and to view its different parts, especially its spores and propagative cycle. And I had been wanting to make a piece about ferns for over a year or so, ever since I visited. Oh, that's not working. Sorry. Let me try again. Ever since I visited the Natural History Museum in Arizona, and I learned that ferns were one of the oldest plants in the world. So right away I thought there must be something really important, something really special about them if they have been able to survive and been around for this long. And so this is a slide of the actual diorama. You can see a little, a fake fern here with a little painted backdrop of the forest. So I did a little bit of research. And ferns are about 400 million years old, which is about 100 million years before dinosaurs. I like how they give us this, 50 million year window. It's pretty scientific and exact. This is an illustration of what the world and these ferns may have looked like 400 million years ago. And especially you would have these really tall tree-looking ferns to more subtle, smaller little ferns. While doing further research, one of the biggest mysteries throughout the history of the fern was how they propagate. They don't have flowers, they don't produce seeds, so for a long time we just didn't know how they reproduced. Some thought they just popped up by magic, or that the seeds were invisible. So all this mystery it led to a wide array of folklore in the 16th and 17th centuries, such as if you hold a fern seed, you would become invisible. Examples of this can be seen in Shakespeare's play, Henry IV, where one of the crooked characters planning a heist, he says they won't be caught because they have, quote, the receipt of fern seeds. We walk invisible. Some also believe that ferns could restore your sight if you went blind. So all of this eventually led to ferns being a popular subject matter in 19th century fairy kingdom paintings, like this one here by Richard Gadd. And if you can't see the fern at first, it's this big structure here coming out of the background, this giant fern leaf. Supposedly this is some story where the king fairy gets jealous and angry at the queen fairy, and then he takes some like psychoactive plant and he drips it in her eyeballs so that she goes to sleep and wakes up and she falls in love with this monster. I then did more light research on 19th century fairy kingdom paintings, just to gather more inspiration and project ideas. I came across this painting here with this woman in her white gown, and it just really reminded me of myself dressed up in my white lab coat. So I thought it would be kind of, a little humorous and just interesting to see what would happen if I posed myself in a similar fashion. Then the final crucial element from my research that contributed to how this piece came together was finally learning how ferns really do propagate. And it just starts with the fern spores being released by the plant, and these spores can then travel up to thousands of miles in the wind, even across oceans. So they're very impressive travelers. When the spore finds the right soil, it germinates, but doesn't grow into anything that looks like a fern. It grows into an entirely different plant called a prothallus. And then here's an actual microscopic image of one. This prothallus contains both male and female sex organs on its leaf-like underside, so very similar to human sperm and eggs. The sperm even has a tail just like human sperm. And then this tail lets the sperm, swim through moisture to find the egg, and then the fertilized egg grows into a fern. So I was just, I was fascinated with all this research, especially how similar the fern's sperm and egg system is to ours, and how much interaction we have had with this fern throughout history. But yeah, so I thought this would be a great piece to start with, since it kind of shows this, this usual process that I like to work in. I just find something interesting about a plant, and then I do research about it, and I try to tell a story about it. I just love plants so much, so I try to share that with people. But yeah, before we look at any more work, I'd like to give you a little background info on myself and look at how I started getting interested in plants. I grew up in Marin County in the San Francisco Bay Area with friends, spending a lot of time getting lost in the forest, just to get away from the busy city and California traffic especially. This is an image of one of my favorite spots that I would hang out at. Very magical, as you can see. After high school, I moved to Eugene, Oregon, and attended the University of Oregon. And here's a shot of the campus and the beautiful frigid rainforest of the Pacific Northwest. And this is where my interest in plants and nature really started to take off. And here's a slide of my first garden, my very first garden I built by myself. I had to till the entire soil and then hand pick out all of those big rocks. I also took an urban farming class at U of O during a summer semester. And the main thing I took away from this class was really the sense of community that evolves around growing plants and growing your own food. Everyone in the garden, they were just so happy, they were so nice. It was summertime, it was beautiful out. But just everybody sharing knowledge about plants while working together. So this is where I really started to become interested in the intersection of plants and culture. Now to take a look at a few projects I worked on as an undergrad. Don't worry, I won't make you suffer through too many projects. But my main focus that I was working on was creating these fictional inventions. This first one here is titled the Green Oil Project. And I got the idea while doing research for the urban farming class on the state of modern industrial farming, and came across something known as dead soil. And I'll read this little description for you. But pretty much, I just present these photographs as evidence for this invention, and then I would present it with a little description of the project for this fake invention. When land is over-farmed, it can rid the soil of all nutrients and can become dead soil. This dead soil contains extremely high amounts of carbon dioxide, which was expelled from the roots of the previous crops. When certain amounts of hydrogen are mixed into the dead soil, it creates a vegetable oil-like substance. The oil then sinks towards the core and is then drilled out. The end result is an oil that contains extremely high amounts of carbon and hydrogen, runs twice as powerful as current fossil fuels, and burns 99.9% cleaner. So as you can see, it's a bit of a satirical critique on our slight addiction to oil. But then I think it's also a critique on this, superficial belief that science will one day save our planet. Rather than us having to figure out how to adjust and deal with it now, I think we'd prefer not to deal with it and just pretend like everything will be okay when science figures out how to fix these issues. This next invention is titled the eggshell seed. Here I presented information for altering the plant's DNA so that it has an eggshell-like layer to protect it from unwanted moisture, thus giving the seed an infinite shelf life. So again, if thousands of years from now, if we do unfortunately destroy our planets, we'll have a bit of a backup plan. We'll have this seed bank. So again, you can see maybe critiquing our trust in science a little bit. This next invention is titled A Camera That Depicts One's Emotions. And you can see here, you have myself dressed up as this scientist to demonstrate how the camera is working. And then next to that, we have the images of the actual emotions. I don't know, I think this one is less of a critique on science and maybe a little bit more about photography. But what's interesting to me, looking back on this work now, is that it's the first time I dress myself up as this, scientist character to perform in front of the camera. Here's a detail shot of that. After graduating, I was just looking for a really big shift, a big change in my work. I really love these fictional inventions, but they were very challenging to think of. So I had a little bit of anxiety that I wouldn't have projects in the future. And then the entire process was also a bit painful conceptually, because I had to sit there and think of this next great invention to think of. So yeah, after graduation, I was just looking to get my body moving in the process a little bit more, less conceptual and a little bit more intuitive. And the thing responsible for this huge shift in my work is when I saw my first opium poppy. And this is an actual photograph of it here in 2012. Right away, I was just fascinated and a bit smitten as well. I just couldn't stop thinking about, how such a delicate flower can cause so much chaos for humans. Especially with the opioid epidemic, addiction to painkillers, heroin addiction, or just pharmaceutical companies, and the state of healthcare in our country, and so on, just so much more. So I just felt like there was something really, really special and important to talk about with this delicate little flower and how much chaos it causes for us humans. So yeah, I brought some of the poppies into the studio, and I started photographing them in the opium harvesting process. So the first thing you do, you cut a slit in the pod, and you let that opium milk drip out, I just love this image too. It's like the guts. It's like this, it's kind of sad and beautiful and gross at the same time. Like the guts of the opium coming out. And what's really interesting here is that if you just grow these poppies in your garden, it's legal. But once you take the poppy and once you cut a little slit in it, it then becomes illegal. So it's just really, it's a little comical to me, but it's just interesting as well, this subtle transition that it has to make. Then you let that opium dry overnight, and then you come back and you scrape it off the opium poppy pod, and it looks something like this. And then here's a dry pod after the opium milk has all been sucked out and it's been dried up. I just, especially looking at this, I loved how these cuts, they really look like claw marks created by an animal, created by a wild animal, and that wild animal is a human. So after photographing these opium poppies, I felt like I had something special, and I could see that this plant was really reflecting these allegories about us. This plant was saying so much about our own human nature. So I then started photographing other entheogens. And entheogens are just psychoactive plants that are used in a ceremonial context. This is Mimosa hostilis root bark, one of the key ingredients in creating ayahuasca that they drink in the Amazon. And you can see here a much more poetic, a much more subjective approach with the dramatic lighting. And then so just experimenting with styles and approaches too. A more straightforward, objective approach here with the black backdrop. This is the iconic toadstool mushroom, aka the Christmas tree mushroom. I wish I had time to tell stories about all these plants, but in short, this mushroom grows at the bottom of Christmas trees because it needs highly acidic bark. So you have this beautiful looking Christmas tree with this bright red mushroom underneath it, maybe referencing a present for Christmas. And then also a reindeer would come along and eat these psychoactive mushrooms. And then the reindeer would feel a little silly and they would start jumping around and dancing in the fields, looking like flying reindeer in the fields. So some think this is how we got the idea of Christmas, from a psychoactive mushroom. Peyote. And I think there's just something really fascinating too about the fact that if we're just walking around in nature and we eat a certain mushroom or cactus, all of a sudden our perspective is completely changed. We just see the entire world differently. And so I think as artists too, perspective is everything. Perspective is so important. So I just think there must be something really special behind these plants. I ended up using this work in my undergraduate inventions to get into grad school. And you can see here, I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do with these plants just yet, so I kept a pretty standard objective approach, just with like the black backdrop. I didn't want to say these are good or bad or what. I got into grad school at Arizona State University and arrived in the summer of 2013, planning to continue my research on plants. My first year there, I was very lucky to receive a commission to document medicinal plants native to Arizona. And really, it was a great way to start venturing out into the desert and to get to know the new landscape and its flora, especially moving from Oregon to Arizona. It was exciting to get out in nature and to start to explore this. It's such a strange, it's like a completely different planet when you're out in the desert. It feels like you're on Mars sometimes. But for the commission, I decided to keep this straightforward approach of a detail shot of the flower next to an image of the entire plant out in the landscape. This is the Sphaerosia, aka globe mallow, with many medicinal applications that we'll see and talk about in a couple of slides. And then brittle bush here. I ended up photographing about a dozen plants for that commission. And while I was working on this project documenting these plants, it felt a little silly that I was wandering around looking for these medicinal plants so far away from the city, so far away from people who may want to know about them and maybe even use them. I also wasn't too crazy about this approach. You know, it was lacking a lot of artistic expression too, but I thought it worked fine for the commission. So I decided to take the project from way out into the desert back into the city, and I started photographing edible, medicinal, and psychoactive plants growing close to people in the Tempe-Phoenix Valley. You know, growing in some people's yards, growing in alleys, growing on the sidewalk, and so on. This also allowed me to just bring these plants back into the studio and create these little still lifes of them. This is the Cirsium neomexicanum, aka the desert thistle, and the milk from the thistle is very helpful with a variety of liver diseases, actually. I also, I quickly realized the still life approach gives me much more control over bringing in objects to symbolize what the plant can be used for. I can bring in these objects to create these little stories of these magical histories of these plants and how so many people have used them forever. These aren't just weeds. These aren't just decorative landscaping plants. So for example, with this Phoracea, a strong infusion can be made from pounded root and boiled water to treat diarrhea. So in the still life, I have the plant laid out here and I pounded out some of the root, and then I have the root boiling in water, but then to symbolize its use to help you with upset stomach and a little diarrhea, I laid out some toilet paper on the tabletop here. Some also believe that you can use the tincture as a bit of an eye wash, and that it actually helps enhance your vision to see better. So I brought in these little eye charts, and then these little stereo cards. I think the military uses them to test how good your vision is. So you put them in the little stereo viewer, and you see how the two images line up as one to test how good your vision is and to see if you can go and fight off in battle or fly an airplane or something. Right. And I chose to include the plant's traditional uses in order, again, just to remind viewers of the rich history and the magical role plants have played in our exploration of knowledge and well-being for thousands and thousands of years, if not hundreds of thousands of years. And just to remind people, again, in the city, that these aren't just weeds to spray poison on so that our sidewalk looks pretty. And they're not just decorative plants that you get at Home Depot and throw in your front yard. They actually do have a fascinating history. This is the Solanum malagnifolium, or the desert nightshade. With this plant, you can actually make a cheese by placing the dried seed pods in a warm jug of milk, and then you take a little coin-sized piece of a rabbit's stomach, and you put it in the warm milk with the seed pods, and then you have cheese. But you have to be careful because nightshades are deadly, so you don't want to make a poisonous cheese. This piece, I had to work on this piece for 2 days. The first day, I spent so much time. I spent all day setting everything up, and it turned out terribly. And then the next day, I was really busy, and I had class really early in the morning. But I was like, I have it all set up. I'll put stuff back in the freezer and the fridge, but I need to redo it. So I had to wake up super early and bring out this rotting dead animal and this stinky cheese. And just that early in the morning and that smell, I'll never forget it. It was a very tough one to make. Morning Glory here, I think, much less information in this one and maybe a bit more expressive. The Morning Glory contains psychoactive ergoline alkaloids, which, they can be smoked for a mild effect. This is the Datura stramonium, or the Jimson weed. This is a low desert datura, and then we have these beautiful high desert datura with these large white, like trumpet flowers. It's a very, very, very powerful hallucinogenic and deliriant, and it's also very deadly. So for this piece, I wanted it to get a little busy and a little chaotic, a little crazy. And for those of you who don't know, the difference between a deliriant and a standard psychoactive plant is a deliriant, it makes you go crazy, it makes you go delirious, so you forget that you took this plant and you think that the circus coming into your house is actually real. So it's really dangerous. It's really tough to work with. So only the most skilled shamans will even consider touching the plant. The desert tobacco, aka wild tobacco, aka coyote tobacco. I love all the different common names too that some of these come with. The aloe barbadensis, or the torch aloe. And sometimes I like to include a lot of objects and information about the plant's uses, and other times I just like to focus on the aesthetics of the plants. The desert broom. I just wanted to recreate my experience with this plant because it's one of the most, it's just giant bush with these white fluffy tips, and sometimes, at the end of a long day out in the desert, I'll be hiking back, and the low sun on the horizon will just touch the tips of these big bushes, and they'll just put on this beautiful spectacle as I'm walking back to the truck. Fabaceae peruviana, an oleander from South America, a very deadly oleander, which explains my setup a little bit. But another important decision I made for this project was opening it up to plants from all around the world instead of just plants native to Arizona, which again, it just allows me to talk about our relationship with these plants and our impact over nature, and how we can, especially in the desert, especially in Arizona, we can just bring in trees from all around the world, and we just pump them with water, and they seem to be fine. The golden crownbeard. For this plant, you can soak it in warm water, which can then be applied to the skin to heal a number of issues, such as rashes, boils, spider bites, and lacerations. And the yucca alata. With this yucca, you can boil the leaves and eat them kind of similar to a cabbage. I love these ones. They look a lot like kind of like Dr. Seuss type plants when they're out in the desert, because they get really tall and then they just kind of fall over when they're done with their little swan song. But yeah, these still lifes were a major part of my thesis show in graduate school, which was another very critical point when it came to thinking about and understanding all of this work with plants I was doing. Especially with the title I ended up choosing for this work, which was Vivarium, which literally means place of life, with the definition being an enclosed space with plants or animals for observation or research purposes. So for example, a fish tank can be a vivarium. But yeah, I fell in love with this title because it really seemed to open up a dialogue about our unique relationship with nature, and just this, this subtle act of concealing fragments of nature, of the natural world, just similar to how a curious child places insects and twigs in a glass jar, that can express a sense of power one has over something, while also expressing, great affection and love towards that same thing. So I then became really, interested in this binary friction of love and distant observation of the natural world. And from here, I then started to see this theme of curiosity, containment, control, and conjuring begin to emerge out of this work. And by conjuring, I just mean, the more magical, the more spiritual side to nature. So yeah, after my thesis show, I was just so excited that I finally had this solid understanding of my work, and I couldn't wait to get back into the studio to really explore and push this theme of the vivarium. This photograph here is of a hollyhock I found growing in an alley. Supposedly it's a fantastic blood thinner. So I wanted it to make it look like this contraption was pumping real blood. And then you can also see I've constructed my own vivarium with the plant inside. The Ruellia bretoniana. We can see the curious scientist character start to emerge back into the work as well. And when creating this one, I wanted it to seem like this curious scientist was really reaching out for the plant, but then also keeping his body at a safe distance. Again, to explore and push this theme of love and distant observation of the natural world. I was also experimenting with pulling styles from the history of botanical illustrations. So with this one, I focused a bit more on plant identification, and then still presenting information about its uses through symbolism. You can buy this plant at Home Depot. It's a very common landscaping plant that you see all around parking lots, and it's just decorated everywhere. But supposedly it has a very impressive pulp that can be used in paper making. The longleaf ephedra. I also noticed I was getting in the habit of having a lot of black backgrounds, so I just decided to try out white backgrounds. And the creosote bush here. The creosote is one of my favorite plants that grows in Arizona. It's known as the plant that cures almost everything. Creosote often symbolizes a long life full of knowledge and good health. And it also smells like rain. It's the strangest thing. Early summer, when it starts to heat up, when the sun really heats up these fields of these bushes, for some reason, these bushes, they release some type of a resin that smells exactly like rain. So it's weird. You go out into the desert and it smells like rain, but there's no water to be seen for miles and miles and miles. So and there's this beautiful book this poet wrote titled "The Desert Smells Like Rain." It's kind of funny. Then in the summer of 2017, I had the amazing privilege of doing a 7-week-long residency in Joshua Tree National Park that was created by the Joshua Tree Highlands Artist Residency Program. I highly recommend applying for it. I think applications are due in January. It's a fantastic family of artists and art supporters out in the desert. So here's the information if you do want to apply. They have amazing facilities, amazing houses out in the desert / the national park, and really nice studios too. This is the house I stayed in. So the house is here on the left. This is my outhouse / outdoor shower. No running, no plumbing inside, no bathroom inside. So it was kind of interesting waking up in the middle of the night just to go to the bathroom in the middle of the desert. And then this is just some shed / little garage area that I could have used as a studio if I needed to. But as you can see, out in nature, there's some neighbors out in the distance, but it was about 200 acres that these people owned. So it was really private and I could explore as much as I wanted. Here's that amazing, beautiful outhouse with a giant water tank on top of it. The outdoor shower was one of my favorite parts. At the end of a long day, being hot out in the desert all day, take a nice outdoor shower as the sun is setting and the ravens are flying back in. And then here's a little view out my front door. You can see nature. Nature is everywhere. Here's Rick, my host and board member of JFAR, just showing me some medicinal plants around the property my first day there. But yeah, going into the residency, I knew I wanted to continue exploring this vivarium theme while also experimenting more with techniques from botanical illustrations. And especially since I was working in the national park, I knew I could no longer cut the plants down and bring them back into the studio to photograph them since it's illegal. So I also wanted to experiment with bringing my still life techniques and my still life approach out to the plant, out in nature. This is the Dudleya succulent, and then on the top left, those are just the GPS coordinates for where the location of the plants were that I found. It's a pretty rare plant, so I thought the the locations would be appropriate. And here's a little shot of the setup. I was experimenting with using a flash in full sunlight, especially since I was used to working in the studio. And when you work in the studio, you have control over everything. You have control over your lighting and especially your composition. So I brought the flash out to have a little bit more control over my lighting. This is the Ephedra villosa, or the desert sand verbena. With this plant, 2 different poultices can be made, which I have depicted here on the right in those 2 little petri dishes. The first poultice on top, that could be made from the flower and leaves. And it could be applied to the skin to reduce swelling and pain from burns. And then the second poultice under that can be made from the root to ease pain caused by lacerations. Here you can see I'm just experimenting with botanical illustration styles with the actual, this is the actual Joshua tree, the very, again, Dr. Seussy looking tree with its flower and fruits. But this is where I really started to see this theme of curiosity, containment, control, and conjuring. This is where I really started to see this theme like come together. You know, the curious scientist holding out this glass lens that I took from an old projector. The curious scientist reaching out and containing the Joshua tree in order to examine it. And then the element of control, and then it just, I think, you know, with the image coming in upside down in the lens, I think that adds the element of magic to it, for me at least. Also references photography a bit. The creosote bush, again, a plant that can cure almost anything. Originally, when designing this one, I thought I wanted to bring in a bunch of symbols and place them in up top on those white circles, just to symbolize what the plant can be used for. But I'm always trying to balance, you know, having a lot of information and a lot of detail in the images, and then also having a little bit of mystery. So I'm always trying to balance out information and mystery. And I thought if I put the symbols in there, it might be too much information. So I liked how just kind of leaving them as is. The Mojave Desert, California buckwheat. With this one, I just loved how in one little bush, I just loved how in one little bush you had so many different colors of the flower. So many different stages. The chia seed plant. Chia seeds are one of the most nutritiously rich seeds, believed to be one of the healthiest foods on the planet. This one was growing on the private property, so I felt fine pulling it up out of the ground. It wasn't illegal. Here's the green ephedra. The ephedra is one of the more special plants. It has some of the oldest known medicinal and ceremonial uses documented. So for example, in certain caves throughout Iraq, 40 to 60,000-year-old Neanderthal remains have been found resting with the ephedra clutched to their chests. And it's believed that these Neanderthals were, you know, they placed the ephedra plant with their deceased as a type of aid or guide for their final journey. So it's fascinating, this history that we do have with these plants and how far back it goes. So I found some scans of some Neanderthal bones here, and I decided to include some cave paintings as well. And yeah, putting this piece together, I was just kind of visualizing it as, you know, a map that this explorer could open up with the plant, and then this map kind of just brings all this information out about what the plant can be used for out in the field. The desert marigold. Supposedly marigolds make a really good deodorant. I haven't tried it though. The yerba santa. Yerba santa, it means holy herb, and it's a really amazing herb for people with chronic allergies. You can make a tea out of it, and supposedly it's a miracle herb. After the residency in 2017, I wanted to keep pushing this new work and bringing it into some of the major park areas in Arizona. This one is in the Superstition Mountains, not far from the city of Tempe, and it's titled Marking Useful Plants. But yeah, for years, I was always so impressed with how many useful plants could be in, you know, such a small area in the desert. And especially with the desert. Because you think of the desert as this barren landscape where no life can live. So I was always wanting to make a piece about how many different types of plants, useful plants, can be in such a small area. So for this one, while I was hiking out there, I originally planned on using hiking tape to tie it around the plant. But then I decided that may take a long time to walk around, tie these little knots, and it might not be too evident out in the landscape. So then I thought, maybe I'll just set up my camera to take a photograph every 6 or 7 seconds, and then I can run around the landscape and use my body as a marker for which plants are useful. My fiance hates, well, she loves this one, but she hates it. She hates ants, and it reminds her of ants kind of coming out of an anthill. She gets very creeped out. We have a lot of ants in the desert. They come in and they just wipe out a dead animal very quickly. And then, of course, I had to create a piece about one of the most iconic cacti in Arizona, the saguaro. And we have a saguaro national park down by Tucson, so I thought it would be appropriate, since I had the Joshua Tree in Joshua Tree National Park, I thought it would be appropriate to photograph the saguaro in Saguaro National Park. And one of my favorite things about the desert, it has such a weird cycle compared to the rest of nature around the world, where we have spring, summer, fall, and winter. In the desert, we kind of have summer and summer. So these plants, they have a really interesting reaction to weather. They have a really interesting life cycle. So with this one, I wanted to show these beautiful fruits, the cycle of these beautiful fruits developing and ripening. And then obviously inserting myself in here, just so that you can get a sense of scale of how large some of these saguaros can be. So it's really impressive. You're just walking through it. Some of these saguaros are just massive. Desert tobacco growing in these rocks with the petroglyphs. They might be hard to see. Let's see, where's my mouse? There's a couple little petroglyphs here. I think this one is a javelina, and I think this is a tortoise. And a javelina is just like a wild pig that we have in the desert. They're very aggressive. They can kind of run in packs. And sorry, let me try to get this out of here. They can be really scary if you spook like a family of javelinas, because they might attack you. The Ocotillo in Hat Mountain. The Oregon Pipe Cactus in Oregon Pipe Cactus National Monument. This is in southern Arizona, pretty much right on the border of Arizona and Mexico. These cactuses are amazing. They're just like these weird octopus aliens kind of coming out of the landscape. It's one of the more beautiful parts of Arizona. Supposedly it has one of the best tasting fruits out of all the cactus in the Sonoran Desert. This is the devil's claw. When creating this piece, I'm not sure if this one is done. I did this one last fall, and I kind of like it as is, but I'm not sure about that. I need to come back to it. But when I came across this plant, I thought it was so interesting and a little silly how far the base of it was growing out, and then it just had a little bit of foliage and one little flower at the end of it. So for some reason, my reaction was to just lay down in the desert and to really stretch out my hand to maybe, in hopes to maybe exaggerate how kind of silly and facetious this plant was. And a piece that I just finished up not too long ago is the Hedgehog Cactus in Papago Park. This is in Tempe, not too far from the city. One of my favorite areas. With the white lines, I was just using those to act as these markers for the different locations of the cactus, while also maybe referencing the topo maps a little bit. Right, I think we're doing right on time. But yeah, to end the lecture, I'll talk about the study abroad trip I got to take this summer teaching a digital photography class through the Maricopa community colleges I work for. But yeah, I worked alongside a biology professor who has been the director of these trips for a long time, so I mean, he had everything worked out, so it was kind of perfect for me, because I just had to tag along. Here are all of the students. I got very lucky. It was the perfect fit for me and my work, and the students were really awesome. They had such good energy. They all loved nature, and they just all really wanted to explore nature as well. One of the girls, she just really wanted to see a jaguar. I was like, no, you don't want to see a jaguar. No. Go for the sloth. The sloth can't move very fast. This is our first stop at the La Selva Biological Station / Preserve, where I was able to create most of my work. And here is the house I stayed in. Pretty fantastic. I got very lucky. One of my favorite parts, other than the amazing green paint job, was that the windows, they had no glass. It was just screens and bars. So all night long, you could just listen to the jungle come to life, and especially the howler monkeys. Like listening to these howler monkeys often, it's the strangest thing when you're hiking through this rainforest too, and all of a sudden it sounds like the rainforest is just roaring with just coming to life. It's very surreal. And a little map to give you a sense of scale of how massive this preserve is. And it was about 4,000 acres of low tropical rainforest. And then up top, let's see. This is about where that house that I just showed you was. Then from there, from those houses, that you can then cross the river on this suspension bridge. And then here's a view of that Rio Puerto Viejo. And then on the other side of the river, on the other side of the houses and the cafeterias, are a bunch of the research facilities. And it was a fairly active place with quite a bit of scientists walking around doing all different types of research. It was amazing. Like some scientists would be 30 miles up into the mountains for weeks studying bats. They'd just be out, like they'd sleep during the daytime in their tents, and then they would come out at night to study bats. So it was a beautiful, amazing place, just buzzing with nature and science. The first thing I did was to hit the trails in order to start scanning for plants and to figure out the type of work I wanted to create while there in that very short time period. Here's a shot a little deeper into the jungle with a little bit more primitive trails. This may look like paradise, but it was one of the most extreme environments I have ever been in. It was so hot and humid. Like after 5 minutes, you would just be covered in sweat from head to toe. And then you're wearing there's a lot of mosquitoes because it's the swamps, so you're wearing this bug repellent that burns your skin. The sun is just beating down on you. You get lightheaded after a few minutes out there. Luckily, coming from the desert, I was a little used to it, but the humidity, I mean, it just makes your head get dizzy just instantly. It's amazing how intense it was. Just scanning for flora and fauna, a little snake skin and a little flower. This is anise. Supposedly you can take the leaves and wrap them around your body like a bandage to help heal sore or strained muscles. And one of the guys, he took the leaf off of the plant and he kind of crumbled it up and he had to smell it, and it smelled exactly like black pepper. Really interesting, had a very powerful aroma. This is the cacao tree and seed pod. So this is where chocolate comes from. You take this giant seed pod and you just cut it in half, and there are a bunch of chocolate seeds inside. You can take little raw ones too, and you can throw them in your mouth and suck on them. And it doesn't taste anything like chocolate. It tastes interesting. Isn't it really just, that's where chocolate comes from. It's just really interesting. It's a really beautiful seed pod too. So yeah, my working method, after I scan for plants, I then do research to identify them and later that night, I just figure out if any of them are useful and which ones I want to go back to photograph. And this is the first piece I made there. This is a hanging passiflora plant that I'm still working on. I'm not sure if it's done yet. I think I need to trim. This white box has been kind of bugging me. I think I need to trim a little up there and maybe bring a little bit more information in. I'm not sure. But yeah, when putting this one together, I was just thinking about the vivarium theme, especially these scientific methods of containment and control in order to just study the natural world, in order to just view it. Supposedly, the plant can be used as a dietary supplement for anxiety and sleep problems. So yeah, my working schedule during this trip was to go out and work on my photography in the morning. Then I would come back to the station to get the students and take them back out into the jungle and have class in the middle of the day. Most of them didn't bring enough water, so I was also there, the water boy for them. Then after class, I would make more work in the hot, swampy rainforest. Yeah, I have a lot of unfinished work that I need to get back to. I've had a pretty busy teaching mode this semester, so I am really excited for next semester. I have a lighter teaching mode, and I'm really excited to come back to this work and figure out how I want to composite it and just what I want to make out of it. This is the one plant that I was in hunt for the entire trip. This is the Brugmansia tree, but it's somewhat related. It's kind of tricky, but it's a bit related to that datura, that little white datura trumpet flower I showed earlier, the still life I made. So it's interesting. This Brugmansia family is all around the world, and it's just one of the most powerful psychoactive plants, but it's also really deadly, and it's just really dangerous. And as I was photographing this plant, a couple of homeless people kind of came out. I don't know if they were homeless or not. It was hard to tell. But as I was photographing it, somebody behind me said, you need to be careful. This plant will make you loco. It's very dangerous. It will make you loco. And I turned around. I was like, I know. That's why I'm photographing it. So I started talking. A lot of the natives know that this plant is crazy. Then after being outside in the harsh elements all day, I would get fairly exhausted, so I would come back to my room to take a little water break and to cool down. This was also just the perfect opportunity to set up a little still life and photograph plants with the light from the setting sun just coming in through the window. And it really worked out great because I could just sit there in this chair with a fan on me to cool down, but I could keep making photographs because I was only here for such a short amount of time, so I just needed to keep working, keep making photographs. So here's a slide of my little studio set up in my bedroom using the green wall as a backdrop. But yeah, I thought the green would be perfect because it can reference the culture in Costa Rica a bit, and it can also talk about their strong connection to nature. Not edible, I don't even know what it is. When making these photographs, I'm just thinking of them as portraits of the plants, while also just trying to tell a story of what it's like being in the rainforest. Maybe just trying to capture the plant's essence, and maybe a little bit of the rainforest essence as well. And maybe also referencing Carl Blossfeld a bit and his scientific approach to photography and nature. And Carl Blossfeld, he's a very old photographer, and he photographed just thousands and thousands of plants. This is the pine cone ginger with an orange background this time. And again, I'm also just so fascinated with nature and how magical it be. So I just look for that in these plants. When I'm looking for plants to bring back and photograph, I'm just looking for ones that are unique and magical, so that I can show you guys, I can show other people how awesome nature is. Go out into nature and go play, go have fun, be safe, but get out there. It might be good for you. Here's a little shot of that next set up at our station we stayed at. And then I'm just using, you can see I have a little reflector here, again, so I can control the light a little bit and fill shadows and so on. This plant, and when I found these weird fruits just laying on the ground under this tree, I mean, it just looked like some weird little alien eggs or something. I don't know, it just looked like the weirdest thing I've ever seen. So I picked it up, and it was also one of the stickiest and worst smelling things I've ever seen. So right away, I threw it in a plastic bag, and I got really paranoid that I was going to have a rash for weeks and weeks and weeks. It smelled so terrible, and it was so sticky, but I just loved how alien it looked. This is the chocolate seed pod, the cacao seed pod again. And it might be hard to see on the projection, but you can see little hand impressions that I left in the green blanket. I got the idea to put the hand impressions when I came back to my room after the maid had cleaned, and I noticed that she folded up this blanket and put it on the bed, and then her two hands left an impression on that blanket. So right away I got very excited because it reminded me of cave paintings, and I also love what the human hand symbolizes. But yeah, so when setting up this still life, I was just thinking about that, along with humans' constant consumption of chocolate and sugar. These human hands constantly feeding. All right. And then to close out this lecture, I'd like to show you a little 4-minute video. I'm still in the process of working on, it's not done yet. I think it's close to being done, but I still have a lot of cleanup work to do, and I'm not sure if the story is there yet, if that makes sense. But for this piece, I came across this tree that is commonly known as the walking tree. And it's called the walking tree because the tree can actually walk and move around. Sort of. What it does is, it'll just grow out these little stilts, it'll grow out these little legs or arms, and then it can slowly move up to a few inches over a couple of years. So right away I was like, well, that's so cool, it's so magical, a tree can actually move around. So yeah, I was just fascinated by this, and as I thought about it for a few days, I thought it might be interesting if I made a video about me walking around the tree naked and barefoot, especially since I had been working in this jungle for about a week now and just constantly thinking about how dangerous everything is and how you want to avoid touching anything at all. At the top left, you can see a deadly pit viper. They're really tiny, but really, really deadly. Then we have a deadly tarantula. On the bottom left, we have this poisonous plant that if you touch, you'll have rashes on your body for about 3 weeks. Then, does anybody know what this is in the bottom right? It's a bullet ant. A bullet ant has the most painful sting out of any animal in the entire world. The most painful sting. The ant is about as big as from your large knuckle to the end of your finger. So they're just these giant ants walking around the rainforest with these huge clampers at the end of their heads. So my first week there, I would just constantly have to think about how much danger there was with every step I took. And it was really fascinating. It reminded me a lot about walking around in the desert, how much you have to slow down and just pay attention to nature in every single step you take. But yeah, and I'd also think about how it must have been here, how it must have been to live here thousands of years ago and to survive in a place like this, how extreme that must have been. So at first I wanted to do the video naked, but then as I thought about it, I thought my body might be a bit distracting for the viewer, so I decided to do it wearing my white lab coat barefoot instead. Which I think it adds this element as you watch the video. I think that white lab coat has the element of ritual to it. All right. And then as a heads up, the crazy sounds that you're going to hear, they're from this Oropendula, the Montezuma bird. that was singing above me as I was doing this performance. All right, Lyle, do you want to come help me out with this video? And again, it's only 4 minutes long. probably don't need to watch it again.
No.
So that's it. I think it's supposed to be done. I'm not sure yet if you guys have any feedback on it. No, that's it. We have time for questions.
Yeah, we have a bit of time for questions.
really interested in this duality between information and mystery. So once you said that, then I couldn't not see that in everything you showed. Just in everything you showed, with the last one being loaded with mystery.
Just the video piece here?
Yeah.
Right.
Loaded. And
Right.
you gave us the information in the beginning, talking about the walking tree, but we wouldn't have known that without you telling us.
Right.
So it's almost like that one is, if you don't know the information, it's really all about the mystery.
Yeah. That's good feedback.
But I'm wondering how you balance that as working. It seems like the information is really, really important to your work. Just the research part is loaded, and then the image part manifests itself in lots of different ways.
How I balance that?
Yeah.
It's hard sometimes too, because sometimes there's so much information and magical stories about the plant. I just want to I want to give you all that information. So sometimes I just have to tell myself no. I really have to force myself to just hold some of that information back, which it can be tough. But there's not a magical recipe that I have, but it's just sometimes it has more information, sometimes it has less too. There's a variety. Sometimes I just have to tell myself I have to leave that bit of information out.
Well, too much information, it becomes documentary. And the more mystery, the more art there. I mean, it's just really an interesting balance you're trying to make here. But I loved hearing all the information, too.
Right, that's why it's tough.
Yeah.
There's so much information. So I think having the little description cards too in the show off to the side so that the viewer has the choice to experience it, the mystery without all the information. And then if they want to learn more about the plant, then they can go and get the information and just have both ways of experiencing the pieces.
Well, there's something too about that comment about if you go into the desert or any, wilderness environment, it's so deadly. It's just loaded, and you showed it really well there at the end, informationally. But I don't know that the average person, they're just thinking, oh, the desert looks so beautiful, I think I'll go for a walk. So I think your work is illuminating that.
Any other questions?
Question over here.
It's mostly a comment, but I grew up in Arizona, so I was very aware of all of the risks, but I never knew about all of the different benefits to the plants that you could see. So it was really interesting to learn about all the different uses, and a lot of them were just weeds. And you really highlighted what they were used for and are used for. So that was really cool to me.
Thank you. Did you recognize some of the plants?
Yeah, a lot of them, a lot of the landscapes. I was in Tempe area, so yeah.
Good. Thank you.
Great.
I was going to ask about the lab coat and the figure of the scientist that's in your work.
Yes.
And you seem to talk quite a lot more about, say, a scientist than, say, a shaman figure. Usually maybe you did talk about, maybe the plural worlds in which these plants are being used in, right?
Right.
Many different backgrounds, right? We're thinking about what plants are used in. But definitely in the last video, right? There's this sense of a kind of a shamanic character more than a scientist. I was sort of going to ask you, how do you think about the lab coat there? What kind of science are you invoking?
Right, well, that's an interesting point, because when I started out this project, I was really interested as the artist as the shaman, or shaman as artist, because there is a lot of connections there, with the artist being born in these caves, doing these certain ceremonies. Some think under the influence of psychedelic plants while they were creating these cave paintings, or maybe not even plants, but a certain trance that they would get into. So I would think a lot about that early on in the work and all these connections that artists and shamans have. And there is a lot of sensitivities with that, though, with cultures and so on. So especially in Arizona, being so close to Mexico and so on, and all the Native American cultures and so on. So yeah, I made the transition from talking a lot about the shaman and all that stuff to, I think, maybe more of the lab coat and the scientists, if that answers your question.
All right.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
there's so much there, right? I mean, you talk about, I don't want to go on, but
No, it's-
Boyce, for example, right? You kind of thought of his role being of a shaman in some part, but people also kind of consider him to be fraudulent in that way.
these early, like more early scientific methods of well, not so scientific, but using these plants, in the community, the shaman would kind of be the recluse of these communities using these plants and trying to figure out how to use these plants to heal people. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many layers. I'm just interested to see how they all kind of interconnect, right? I mean, for Boyce, he was kind of fraudulent about his own biography, right? And then,
I jump on that point. Yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking about, especially the earlier work, where you're inventing kind of these new sciences, and that's what Boyce especially was guilty of, is inventing his own backstory as this artistic persona.
Creating his own myth.
Yeah, exactly. And so that myth building component is being an active thing rather than like the folkloric collecting or finding other people's myths, like actually being involved in the creation of the myth story. Which I think in your first image you showed too, like how you're starting to insert mushrooms and other things and more fantastical elements into the image. That was a good question. I was just sorry.
Yeah, Boyce is a very interesting figure. A little controversial too. Very controversial. I have a love-hate relationship with Boyce.